I'm Abigail Foster, 35 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life has existed under the shadow of my family's quiet contempt. At my father's 60th birthday celebration in Raleigh, I sat off to the side in a corner chair, staring down at a single dry piece of bread resting on a small plate. Around me, the room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and polite conversation, but my stepmother's voice cut through it all like a blade. "That's all you deserve," she said coldly. My sister's lips curled into a smug smile as she added, "You're always invisible, Abby, always pathetic." Their words landed hard, sharp, and deliberate. The laughter in the room kept going, but for me, everything felt distant, like I was underwater listening to echoes. But tonight wasn't about humiliation, the way it had been so many times before. I hadn't come there hoping for kindness or acceptance. I had walked into that elegant hall with a purpose. The room glowed with warm lighting and polished elegance. Crystal glasses chimed as guests toasted my father. Nearly 60 people filled the space, friends, investors, and wealthy figures from Raleigh's social circle. They chatted comfortably, completely unaware that something very different was about to happen. Inside my coat pocket rested a small USB drive, and the weight of it made my heartbeat pound louder with every passing minute. It felt like a drum beating in my chest. When the time for speeches arrived, people slowly quieted and turned their attention toward the front of the room. That's when I stood up. My legs trembled slightly as I rose, but my gaze remained steady. "Let's watch something real," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the chatter. A large screen behind the stage flickered to life. In that exact moment, my stepmother's confident smile stiffened and froze. My sister's eyes widened as the color drained from her face. The whispering in the room faded quickly, replaced by a thick silence that felt almost heavy. "Turn it off!" my stepmother suddenly shrieked, her voice sharp and panicked. But it was already far too late. Every guest in the room sat motionless, their eyes fixed on the screen as the truth unfolded in front of them. And standing there in the middle of that silence, I realized something I had waited years to feel. The truth had finally come out. If you were standing where I stood in that moment, would you reveal everything in front of your family and their friends, or would you stay quiet just to keep the peace? Tell me what you think in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else who is facing a similar battle. Just days before I walked into that party, I was sitting alone in my Raleigh apartment, staring at an email that felt more like a trap than an invitation. As a documentary filmmaker, my career revolves around telling the stories of people who are overlooked by the world. There's an irony in that, because being invisible has been the defining theme of my own life. My apartment is small, cluttered with camera equipment, tripods, memory cards, and half-finished scripts scattered across my desk. But it's my safe space in a city where status and money often matter more than anything else. My mother died when I was 5 years old. My memories of her are faint and blurry, like photographs that have faded over time. By the time I turned 7, my father had remarried. My stepmother, Karen, moved into our house along with her daughter, Shannon, who was 3 years younger than me. That was the moment everything shifted. Karen never hid the fact that I wasn't her priority. Her gaze was always cool and distant whenever she looked at me. Shannon, who followed her everywhere, quickly learned how to mirror that same attitude. The smirk she gave me often hurt more than any direct insult. Growing up, I existed as an afterthought in my own home. Karen bought Shannon expensive clothes, signed her up for piano lessons, and proudly attended every one of her school performances. When Shannon stood on stage at a recital, Karen clapped louder than anyone. When it came to me, there was very little attention at all. I wore old jeans that had faded with time and received mostly silence in return for my efforts. When I was 10 years old, I once asked if I could join a dinner my father was hosting for his business partners. Karen's answer was immediate and cutting. "You're not part of this," she said sharply. Shannon chimed in without hesitation. "Stay out of it, Abby." My father was buried in discussions about property deals and investments that night. If he noticed the exchange at all, he never showed it. I quietly backed away, learning a lesson that would follow me for years. Stay quiet, blend in, don't make trouble. Our house in Raleigh was large and impressive, but inside it I often felt like I was disappearing into the walls. The only real escape I had was a cheap camcorder I bought when I was 16. With it, I began filming small stories about other overlooked people, kids who felt ignored, people whose voices weren't being heard. It became my way of understanding the world. Karen dismissed it as pointless. "That's a waste of time," she said once. Shannon laughed at the idea entirely. "Your little films won't change anything." At 18, I left home. I pieced together a life through scholarships, part-time jobs, and countless late nights editing footage on borrowed equipment. While I was struggling to find my footing, Shannon moved through life much more smoothly. My father's connections helped her secure internships during college, and family money paid most of her expenses. When she graduated, Karen threw her a massive party filled with decorations and catered food. I wasn't invited. My father mailed me a check instead, with 2 simple words scribbled on a note. "Congrats." That was all. Over time, the distance between us only grew wider, but the feeling of being treated like I was somehow less than them never really disappeared. Instead, I channeled that pain into my work. My documentaries began earning small awards at film festivals. They never reached mainstream attention, but each project meant something to me. The only person who truly believed in my talent from the beginning was my friend Ellen Reed. She was a graphic designer I had known since high school, and she had always been the one person who saw past my doubts. Sometimes we would sit together at a small cafe downtown, drinking coffee while she looked through my latest footage. "Your films matter, Abby," she would tell me. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." When the email invitation to my father's birthday party arrived, signed by Karen, my first instinct was to delete it immediately. The message was stiff and formal, written like I was some distant relative rather than his daughter. I imagined walking into a room full of Raleigh's wealthiest social figures, only to be ignored all over again. Why would I willingly put myself through that? I was still staring at the message when Ellen, who had been stretched out across my couch, grabbed my phone out of my hand. "You're going," she said firmly. "Why?" I asked. "Not for them," she replied. "For you, to prove you're not invisible." Her words made my chest tighten. For years, I had avoided confronting my family. It was easier to bury those feelings in my work and keep my distance. But Ellen's confidence forced me to rethink everything. She was right. I wasn't the quiet kid hiding in her room anymore. Memories resurfaced in my mind like sparks reigniting old wounds. The Christmas when Karen gave Shannon a sapphire bracelet while handing me a simple bookstore gift card. Shannon's extravagant 16th birthday party in a rented ballroom, while my own graduation passed with nothing more than a text message from Dad saying he was proud. Each moment had built another brick in the wall between us. But those same moments had also shaped who I became. My determination, my storytelling, my resilience, they all grew out of those experiences. I wasn't planning to attend that birthday party to beg for attention or demand a place at their table. I was going to walk in standing tall and face the family who had spent years pushing me aside. 2 weeks before the celebration, Ellen burst into my apartment late one evening looking unusually tense. She had been sketching in a cafe downtown when she overheard something that caught her attention. Shannon had been sitting nearby, speaking quietly on the phone, but Ellen recognized her voice immediately. "It's all set, Kyle," Shannon had whispered, her tone smug, despite the noise of coffee cups and chatter around her. "The shares will be mine soon." The name Kyle caught Ellen's attention right away. He was one of Shannon's friends who often showed up at family gatherings with a polished smile that never quite felt genuine. Ellen didn't hear the entire conversation, but that single sentence had been enough to send a chill down her spine. When she told me about it, my heart skipped. Shannon talking about shares in my father's real estate company didn't make sense. That business was my father's life's work, the foundation of our family's wealth. Why was she speaking about it like someone planning a secret takeover? A knot tightened in my stomach. Karen had always pushed Shannon into the spotlight, grooming her to take over the company someday, while Y was excluded from every serious conversation about the business. But this sounded different. Was this their latest move to cut me out completely? Or was something even worse happening behind the scenes? Ellen paced across my living room as she explained everything she heard. "She's definitely hiding something," she said, tossing her sketchbook onto the couch. "Shannon's not nearly as clever as she thinks she is." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. For years, I had built a career uncovering other people's hidden truths per film. Now it seemed like I needed to uncover the secrets within my own family. And that very night, we started digging. Ellen remembered a shared cloud account from a freelance job she'd done for Shannon's marketing side hustle. Shannon, true to form, hadn't changed her password. We huddled over my laptop, the screen's glow casting shadows as we scrolled through her messages. Most were trivial, dress fittings, lunch plans. But then we found a thread with Kyle Ramsey, Shannon's college buddy. "Make sure the papers are ready," Shannon typed. "Dad won't suspect a thing." Kyle's response was blunt. "Karen's got the lawyer lined up." My breath caught. They were planning to transfer Dad's company shares to Shannon, tricking him into signing them away. Karen was orchestrating it, using her charm to keep Dad clueless. I stared at the screen, anger bubbling up. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was betrayal, pure and cold. Dad had poured his soul into that company, building it from a single office to a Raleigh empire. I pictured him in his study, signing deals with that quiet pride, unaware his wife and stepdaughter were scheming behind him. Ellen, leaning over my shoulder, muttered, "They're playing dirty." I nodded, my jaw tight. "We need proof," I said, "something they can't deny." We kept searching. One message from Kyle jumped out. "Bring the documents tomorrow, all set for the transfer." Attached was a draft agreement detailing how Dad's majority shares would go to Shannon, with Karen's signature already scrolled at the bottom. I saved it to a USB drive, my hands shaking. This was bigger than I'd imagined, a calculated move to strip Dad of his legacy. I thought of confronting Karen, but her sharp tongue would twist it against me. Shannon would just laugh. No, I needed something solid, something public. Ellen had an idea. "Let's catch them talking," she said, her voice low. The next afternoon, she trailed Shannon to a bar on Fayetteville Street, blending in with the crowd. I stayed back, editing footage at home, my phone buzzing with her updates. "They're here," she texted, then sent a shaky audio clip from her phone. Shannon's voice came through clear and cocky. "Once Dad signs, it's ours. He trusts Karen too much." Kyle's laugh crackled in the background. "He's got no idea." I gripped my phone, fury rising. They thought they could play Dad for a fool, and me along with him. Back at my place, Ellen and I pieced it together. Karen would slip the papers into a routine contract, convincing Dad it was business as usual. Shannon would get the shares, and I'd be left with nothing. Not that I wanted the money, but the lies cut deep. Ellen looked at me, her eyes fierce. "You've got enough to bury them," she said. I clutched the USB, my resolve steeling. The party was my shot to expose them. The night of the party arrived. I walked into the historic Raleigh Hall, its wooden columns and chandeliers glowing with old money charm. The air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of crowd that thrived on status. I dressed simply, a black dress, no frills, knowing I'd never blend in with the tailored suits and sparkling gowns. My hand rested in my pocket, fingers brushing the USB drive that held the truth about Karen and Shannon's scheme. It was my anchor, a reminder of why I was here. I scanned the room for Dad, hoping for a glance of warmth, but he was lost in a sea of handshakes, his face lit by the glow of business talk. A young waiter approached, his expression polite but stiff. "This way, ma'am," he said, leading me past the main tables where Raleigh's elite sipped wine to a small table tucked near the emergency exit. The chair wobbled, the tablecloth was stained, and a single plate sat before me with a dry piece of bread. I stared at it, my chest tightening. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. Karen's touch was all over it. I caught her eye across the room, her lips curling into a faint, satisfied smirk. She glided over, her silk dress rustling, and leaned in close. "That's all you deserve," she said, her voice low, dripping with disdain. Shannon, trailing behind in a glittering gown, let out a sharp laugh. "Always invisible," she added, her words slicing through the hum of the party. I gripped the USB tighter, my knuckles white. Their words stung, but I'd heard worse growing up. This time, I wasn't the kid who shrank away. I forced a smile, holding Karen's gaze. "Nice setup," I said, my tone steady, though my heart pounded. She raised an eyebrow, surprised I'd spoken. then turned away, dismissing me with a flick of her wrist. Shannon lingered, her smirk widening. "Don't embarrass us tonight," she said, before sauntering back to the main table, where she basked in the attention of Dad's business partners. I sat alone, the bread untouched, my mind racing. The hall's grandeur felt suffocating, polished floors reflecting the light, walls lined with portraits of Raleigh's past. I noticed the other guests glancing my way, some with pity, others with disinterest. A woman in the pearl necklace whispered to her companion, her eyes flicking toward my table. I straightened, refusing to slouch. I wasn't here for their approval. The USB in my pocket was proof I had something they didn't: truth. I thought of the messages. I'd found the audio of Shannon and Kyle plotting to steal Dad's company. That knowledge kept me grounded, even as the room seemed to close in. Dad finally appeared, moving through the crowd with a tired smile. I stood, hoping to catch his eye, but Karen intercepted him, her hand on his arm, steering him toward a group of investors. He didn't see me, or maybe he chose not to. The familiar ache hit, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about winning his love tonight. It was about stopping a lie. I scanned the room for the projector, set at my plan taking shape. The speeches would come soon, and I'd be ready. As the evening wore on, waiters circled with trays of champagne, but none stopped at my table. A man in a sharp suit bumped into my chair, muttering an apology without looking at me. I felt the weight of every slight, every moment I'd been pushed aside, but I also felt the USB, solid and real, a weapon I'd wield when the time came. Karen and Shannon thought they could bury me with a piece of bread in a corner table. They were wrong. As the speeches began, I felt the weight of the moment. The MC's voice echoed through the hall, praising Dad's legacy in real estate. The crowd applauded as Karen stepped up, her smile polished, talking about family and loyalty. I could barely listen, my pulse racing. This was it, my chance to show them all. I caught the eye of the AV tech I'd spoken to earlier, a nervous kid who'd agreed to help after I slipped him $20. I gave him a nod, and he slipped into the control booth. Karen finished a polite claps, and the MC called for more remarks. I stood, my legs steady despite the knot in my chest. "I have something to share," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. Heads turned, some curious, others annoyed. Karen's smile froze, and Shannon's eyes narrowed from the main table. I walked to the stage, the USB in my hand, and handed it to the tech. "Play it," I whispered. He plugged it in, and the screen behind me flickered to life. The video started with a grainy text message, blown up for all to see, Shannon's words to Kyle. "Make sure the papers are ready. Dad won't suspect a thing." Gasps rippled through the room. The screen shifted to another message, Karen's name clear. The lawyer's set. Then came the audio clip, Shannon's voice unmistakable. "Once Dad signs, it's ours. He trusts Karen too much." Kyle's laugh followed, cold and smug. "He's got no idea." The crowd went silent, the air heavy with shock. I stood still, watching their faces, some wide-eyed, others whispering furiously. Karen's composure cracked. She stood, her voice sharp. "Turn it off," she snapped, but the tech looked at me, unsure. I shook my head, and the video kept rolling, showing the draft agreement with Karen's signature, outlining the plan to transfer Dad's shares to Shannon. The hall erupted in murmurs, guests turning to each other, their faces a mix of disbelief and outrage. I glanced at Dad, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker, betrayal. He stood slowly, his eyes locked on Karen. Before anyone could move, Kyle stumbled in from the back, his face flushed, clearly caught off guard. "It's true," he blurted, his voice shaky as eyes turned to him. "Shannon and Karen, they planned it all. I just followed orders." The room exploded in chaos. Guests shouting questions, some glaring at Shannon, who sat frozen, her charm shattered. Karen stepped toward Dad, her hands raised, voice trembling. "Gregory, it's not what it looks like," she said, but he cut her off, his face hard. "Explain this," Dad said, his voice low but piercing, pointing at the screen. Shannon tried to speak, her words stumbling. "Dad, it was just a misunderstanding," she said, but her voice cracked, unconvincing. I stood silent, letting the evidence speak. The guests' whispers grew louder, their judgment clear. A woman in a velvet dress leaned toward her husband, muttering about disgrace. A man in a tuxedo shook his head, staring at Karen. I felt a strange calm, the weight of years lifting. I'd done what I came to do. Dad turned to me, his eyes searching mine. For the first time that night, he saw me, really saw me. "You did this?" he asked, his voice soft but heavy. I nodded, my throat tight. "I had to," I said. He didn't respond, but his gaze held something new. Respect, maybe, or regret. Karen tried again, her voice shrill. "She's lying, Gregory. She's always been jealous." But the crowd wasn't listening. The evidence was undeniable, and her mask had slipped. Shannon stood, her face pale, and tried to slip toward the exit, but guests blocked her path, their stares cold. Kyle, still standing, awkwardly muttered, "I didn't mean for this," but trailed off as heads turned. The hall felt smaller, the chandeliers glow harsher, as the truth settled over everyone. I stepped back, my role done. I'd spent years being invisible, but tonight I'd made them see. The MC cleared his throat, trying to regain control, but the night was broken. The room still buzzed with tension. I stood off the stage, my heart steady, but my hands clenched, watching the chaos unfold. A tall man in a tailored suit stood up from the main table, his face stern. "Matthew Stone, senior partner at Stone & Associates," he announced, his voice cutting through the noise. "Gregory, we've trusted your family for years, but this," he gestured, at the frozen screen, still displaying Karen's signed agreement. "We're done here. The merger is off." The crowd gasped, heads turning to Dad, whose face paled. Karen lurched forward, her voice shrill. "This is a mistake," she cried, her hands trembling as she faced Matthew. "Those documents were just drafts. Nothing was finalized." Her words sounded desperate, clinging to a crumbling facade. Shannon jumped in, her face flushed. "It's all a misunderstanding," she said, forcing a smile. "Abigail twisted everything," but her voice wavered, and the guests weren't buying it. A woman in a sapphire dress turned away, whispering to her companion. A man in a bow tie shook his head, his expression cold. The room's mood had shifted. No one trusted them anymore. I watched silent as the weight of their lies crushed them. Matthew didn't bother responding. He nodded to his team, who gathered their coats and headed for the exit, their footsteps echoing in the now quiet hall. Other guests followed, some muttering about broken trust, others casting sharp glances at Karen and Shannon. A couple near the bar stood abruptly, leaving half-finished drinks. The party, once alive with laughter, felt like a funeral. I caught snippets of conversation. Disgrace. How could they? As Raleigh's elite abandoned the family they had once courted, Dad stood motionless, his shoulders slumped. I'd never seen him like this, stripped of his usual confidence. He looked at Karen, then Shannon, his eyes heavy with disappointment. "You did this behind my back," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. Karen reached for his arm, her face pleading. "Gregory, please let me explain," she said, but he pulled away, shaking his head. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the double doors, his silhouette fading into the dim hallway. The sight hit me harder than I expected. Not triumph, but a quiet ache for the father I'd always wanted closer. Shannon spun toward me, her eyes blazing. "You ruined everything," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to draw stares. I met her gaze, unflinching. "You did that yourself?" I said, my tone calm but firm. She froze, her mouth open, but no words came. Karen, still standing near the stage, looked small for the first time, her elegance undone. "You'll regret this," she muttered, but her threat lacked weight. The guests who remained ignored her, their backs turned as they whispered among themselves. I felt no need to respond. Their world was collapsing, and I'd only held up a mirror. Standing there, I felt something shift inside me. The years of being pushed aside, of being unseen, didn't vanish, but they loosened their grip. I wasn't the kid hiding in her room anymore, or the woman relegated to a corner table. I'd stood up, shown the truth, and the room had seen me. A woman in a red gown approached her, her expression soft. "That took courage," she said quietly, before walking away. Another guest, an older man with glasses, gave me a nod, his face unreadable, but not unkind. Their gestures, small as they were, grounded me. The hall emptied quickly, the clink of glasses replaced by the hum of hushed voices. Karen and Shannon stood alone near the stage, their faces drawn, no longer the untouchable duo they'd been. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth had done its work. I thought of my films, the stories I told for others, and realized this was mine. I'd spent years documenting pain and resilience, and tonight I'd lived it. Months later, the dust had settled, and I faced a new reality. The family company crumbled faster than I'd expected. Without Matthew Stone's merger, other partners pulled out, spooked by the scandal. By spring, Dad's real estate empire, once a Raleigh cornerstone, was bankrupt. I read about it in the local paper. The headline, "Stark Foster Properties Collapses Amid Betrayal." I felt a pain for Dad, who'd poured his life into those buildings, but I didn't regret my choice. The truth had been necessary, even if it tore everything down. Karen Fall was just as swift. Raleigh's high society, once her playground, turned its back. I heard she showed up at a charity gala, her usual elegance intact. But the women she'd once dined with, ladies in pearls and tailored dresses, gave her cold shoulders. Whispers followed her. She betrayed Gregory. Invitations dried up, and her name vanished from the social pages. I saw her once, crossing Hillsborough Street, her face drawn, clutching a coffee cup like it was her only anchor. I didn't stop to speak. There was nothing left to say. Shannon's charm couldn't save her either. Her marketing gigs, built on her polished image, evaporated. A major ad campaign with a regional bank dropped her after the news spread, her face no longer welcome on billboards. I overheard a former client at a downtown cafe saying she thought she could play everyone. Shannon tried to pivot, posting desperate updates on social media, but the comments were brutal. Accusations, mockery, silence. She'd always thrived on attention, but now it was gone, replaced by a void she couldn't fill. Dad retreated entirely. He moved to a small condo outside Raleigh, cutting contact with Karen and Shannon. I tried calling once, leaving a voicemail, but he didn't respond. A mutual friend told me he was spending his days fishing, a quiet escape from the wreckage. I wanted to reach out, to rebuild something, but his silence spoke louder than words. He trusted Karen, believed in Shannon, and their betrayal had broken him. I carried that weight, knowing my actions had forced him to see it. But I couldn't undo the past. For me, life took a different turn. A week after the party, I got a call from Susan Clark, a producer I'd met at a local film festival years ago. She'd been at the gala, one of the few who'd nodded at me with respect. "Your courage stuck with me," she said, her voice warm over the phone. "I've got a project, a documentary on family legacies. You in?" I met her at a small studio off Glenwood Avenue, where we pored over contracts and storyboards. Susan's confidence in me felt new, untainted by the family drama. I signed the deal, my pen steady, a spark of pride igniting. It was my first real break, a chance to tell stories that mattered. The work consumed me. I spent mornings editing footage, afternoons scouting locations, my apartment now a maze of scripts and coffee mugs. Susan pushed me to dig deeper, to capture raw truths, the kind I'd always chased. I thought back to my old camcorder days, filming shadows to feel seen. But this was different. I was building something of my own, not proving myself to anyone. The crew respected me, their nods and quick smiles, a quiet validation. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Raleigh felt smaller now, its old wounds fading. I walked past the shuttered Foster Properties office one evening, its sign rusted, windows dark. I didn't linger. The past was done, and I was moving forward. Susan's project was gaining buzz, with screenings planned across the state. I poured myself into it, framing shots that told stories of loss and resilience, echoes of my own journey. My name, my work, was starting to carry weight. I thought of Dad sometimes, wondering if he'd ever call. I hoped he'd find peace, maybe even pride in what I'd become. Karen and Shannon were shadows now, their lives unraveling, while mine took shape. I didn't wish them harm, but their absence felt like freedom. The city, once a cage of expectations, was now a canvas for my stories. I sat at my desk one night, the script open, and felt a quiet strength. This was my future, and I was ready to write it. A year later, I stood on my own stage, ready to share my work. The theater on Har Street was packed, the air humming with anticipation. My documentary, a tapestry of family legacies, woven with raw honesty, was about to premiere. I stood at the podium, my hands steady, looking out at faces I didn't know, strangers who'd come to see my story. The lights dimmed and the screen glowed, each frame a piece of my heart. I watched the audience lean forward, their eyes locked on scenes of fractured bonds and quiet triumphs. When the credits rolled, applause erupted, warm and genuine. I felt a swell of pride, not just for the film, but for the path that led me here. After the screening, people lingered, their voices soft as they shared their own stories. A young woman in a denim jacket thanked me, her eyes bright. "Your film made me want to speak up," she said. An older man in a tweed cap shook my hand, saying, "You've got something real here." Their words stayed with me, proof that my work mattered. Susan had been right. Telling the truth, even when it hurt, could move people. I signed posters in the lobby, my name in bold print, a marker of how far I'd come. Later that week, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months, Karen's. Her voice was hesitant, her voice stripped of her usual edge. "We need to talk," she said, "for old time's sake." I listened, my thumb hovering over the call button, but I didn't press it. I deleted the message, my heart calm. Karen's world had unraveled, and she wanted something from me. Forgiveness, maybe, or a way back into my life. But I was done carrying her weight. I'd spent years under her shadow, and I wouldn't step back into it. I turned off my phone and walked away, the decision final. One crisp morning, I drove to the old rally hall, its wooden columns now weathered, the chandeliers dark. The building stood empty, a relic of that night when everything changed. I parked and stepped out, my camera in hand. The air was cool, the street quiet. I framed a shot of myself in front of the hall, my reflection faint in the glass doors. The click of the shutter felt like a full stop, a way to mark my freedom. This place, once a stage for my pain, was now just a backdrop. I wasn't the woman relegated to a corner table anymore. I was someone new, unburdened. I thought about the journey that brought me here. The truth had been my weapon, not to destroy, but to build. Exposing Karen and Shannon Seam had cost me a family, but it gave me something greater, myself. I'd learned that silence could trap you, but speaking out, even when your voice shook, could set you free. I wanted others to know that too. At the screening, I'd ended my speech with a simple call. Stand up for your truth. It's worth it. I hoped someone, somewhere, would hear it and find their own courage. Raleigh had changed for me. Its streets, once heavy with memories, now felt open, full of possibility. I drove past cafes and parks, seeing them with new eyes. My apartment, cluttered with scripts and film reels, was a space of creation, not escape. I was no longer defined by what I'd lost, but by what I'd built. The documentary was just the start. Susan had pitched another project, and I was ready to dive in, to keep telling stories that mattered. As I stood in my kitchen that night pouring coffee, I felt a quiet certainty. The past would always be there, a shadow in the corner, but it no longer held me. I'd faced it, named it, and let it go. My camera sat on the counter, ready for the next frame. I was free, not just from Karen or the family or that old hall, but from the fear of being unseen. The truth had given me that, and I'd carry it forward, one story at a time.